You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the movie Star Trek First Contact. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How you, Dom?
And Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Nanu.
Folks, remember to like The Secrets of Star Trek on our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Retweet us on Twitter, where we're at SQPN, and be sure to leave us comments. We love to hear from you wherever you find us online. I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you are sure to enjoy called The Secrets of Doctor Who. You can hear the three of us talk about Doctor Who and find that wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/Doctor Who. Jimmy, can you give us a recap of Star Trek First Contact?
This week, Captain Picard and the gang on the Enterprise must deal with a long-awaited Borg invasion of the Federation. Because of his time as Locutus, the Federation sidelines them. But when the battle goes badly, Picard and the gang violate orders and come to Earth. Using Picard's knowledge of the Borg, they fire on a small, unnoticed thermal exhaust port on the Death Star and destroy the cube. But the cube sends a small sphere back in time, it changes history, and Earth is assimilated. Following it back in time, the Enterprise discovers that its mission was to change history and prevent first contact between humans and Vulcans, which happened when Zefram Cochrane made the first warp flight and attracted Vulcan attention. We thus get multiple simultaneous missions. Down on Earth, Riker, Geordi, and others must repair Zefram Cochrane's ship and convince him to go through with his historic flight. Up on the Enterprise, Picard, Worf, and others must deal with a Borg invasion of the ship. And in engineering, the Borg Queen is giving Data skin grafts and tempting him to become her new consort. At one point, it looks like the only way to win is to evacuate the Enterprise and blow it up, but Picard refuses to do this. However, a visitor from the 21st century named Lily convinces him otherwise. As everyone is leaving the Enterprise, Picard hears a telepathic message from Data, so he stays behind and goes to engineering to rescue him. Picard and Data then use trickery and team up to defeat the Borg Queen, who dies. Afterwards, Vulcans make contact with humans, and the Enterprise returns to the future. The end.
All right. So let's place this in context, in time. The movie came out in 1996.
About 10 years after World War III.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, the story itself is about 10 years after World War III. This movie came out in 96, which was during DS9 Season 5 and Voyager Season 3, which is relevant because Worf ends up showing up here on the Enterprise. They have to get him back onto the Enterprise for the movie.
Well, it's interesting because this was shortly after the introduction of the Defiant. That was only Season 4, if I remember correctly. So the Defiant was only a year old, and then it gets its butt kicked.
Right.
Not destroyed, but gets rather heavily damaged in the process.
In sharing the script for this, they got a note back from Ira Stephen Bear over at Deep Space Nine saying, y'all destroyed the Defiant. And so they added a line saying where Worf is told after he's beamed off to the Defiant with other survivors, including presumably other Deep Space Nine cast members that we would know.
Yep.
He's told it's damaged but salvageable.
Right, right. Because that's just bad form to destroy someone else's starship for their show.
Exactly.
So one of the major themes, I think, for this movie is don't meet your heroes, which is a sort of trope that you get in a lot of stories. And this idea that they have this idealized view of Zefram Cochrane, who's the the first warp human, by the way, which is kind of funny how they idolize him, even though members of the Federation got there first. But in any case, and then they meet him and he's just, he's sort of a drunken guy who's out to make a buck with his invention sort of thing.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting take.
I love the Lily where Picard's talking about, we're not capitalists. We don't deal with money. We're kind of like you and Zefram Cochrane in that. And she just kind of sneers and kind of mocks a little bit, kind of, Sure.
She gets this really weird expression on her face, and she doesn't make anything out of it.
Right.
Which, by the way, that's great writing. It's just you see it on her face, like, yeah, sure, that's not us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alfre Woodard does a really good job. She's a good actress. I mean, she's a award-winning actress, and does a really good job with Lily in this story.
This
out of time.
This is nice. So apparently there were originally hopes of having Tom Hanks be Zefram Cochrane.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Which I think would be terrible. I'm not a big Tom Hanks fan, especially not after the Da Vinci Code.
Mm.
But they then wrote it for James Cornwall, and he is great in the role. He's very human. He's very funny. He's a little over the top. The humor could be better, but it's good. And the idea of a historical figure at a pivotal moment is going to reflect your later values.
Yep.
No. And this is just true. You look at our own history. Okay. Abraham Lincoln, the president who freed the slaves, he's going to be so enlightened and blah, 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 blah. You study Abraham Lincoln's life? No.
Yeah.
He may have been opposed to human slavery, but that was about it. And even with regard to the status of African-American descended people in society, this man was no Martin Luther King Jr. in his ideology. So, yeah, you go back in history and you meet someone at a pivotal moment, do not expect them to live up to later ideals.
Well, and at least with Zefram Cochrane, they hint very clearly that he becomes this person.
They do
eventually, because Riker throws a line that he said 10 years later, 10 years after this.
And you can tell after he actually makes the flight, and as he's in the process of doing it, there's a process of change happening to Zefram Cochrane, where he's beginning to get the vision of the future a little bit more.
Right. And then of course, in Enterprise, they bring him back for the maiden flight of the NX-01 Enterprise, and he has this speech that more the person he's modeled to be.
Right. And that's actually kind of is people become more, people change. And, George Washington wasn't George Washington, from the moment he was born. He became the statesman and still had his flaws, nevertheless. And that's the sort of idea is maybe Cochrane grows into the role, and that's not a bad message.
But and there's an element of truth there, but it's also true that these guys are overestimating who Cochrane is.
Right. Yeah. That's true. So we start with Picard having his Locutus nightmare, which is creepily effective. And frankly, with the resources of a major motion picture as opposed to a syndicated television show, the one lone man among the Borg collective is suitably impressive. You have that pullback, and there he is in amongst them all.
I was thinking about that because this was directed by Jonathan Frakes, and he had cut his teeth as a director on The Next Generation, and he was the first of the cast members to start to direct. He was given the opportunity, and he did it well enough they were willing to let other cast members try. Not all of them, but some of them.
Right.
And I was thinking about that opening shot because we start with a shot of Picard in his Federation uniform in a Borg alcove chamber, and then we have this extensive pullback that just keeps going. And I was thinking about reading I've done about other Trek movies and how directors have wanted really impressive pullbacks in opening sequences. Like William Shatner for Star Trek V had this Powers of 10 opening shot in space where he just wanted to keep pulling back and pulling back and pulling back. And he couldn't afford it because those shots are expensive. You have to do a whole bunch of stuff. In this one, they not only would have had the immediate set that Patrick Stewart was standing on, they then had to do all this matte paintings, multiple matte paintings with different layers and stuff in order to achieve the pullback. And it's like, okay, I guess I had enough in their budget that Frakes could afford to do this.
Yeah.
Right. Well, they did a lot of, location shooting in, the Los Angeles area with all the Cochrane stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably saved them some special effects budget.
And this is starting to get some digital work in the film too. It hadn't gotten down the level of TV yet, but digital could start using more digital effects and things like this. So that does kind of cut down a little bit of the time, if nothing else.
So when in the story, we have, like you mentioned, Jimmy, that Starfleet we get this Borg invasion coming that they've been expecting, and Starfleet sends the new Enterprise with Picard off to the Romulan neutral zone, presumably because they don't trust him having been a Borg.
Not presumably, Picard says that's why.
Yeah, right. I mean, they don't come out and say it to him, but they give him a mission, but everyone recognizes it's a make work mission to get him off the side.
And they also, the reason they don't trust him is not, I mean, it's because he used to be a Borg, but why you wouldn't trust someone who used to be a Borg is not clear. It could be either because he's going to panic and freeze up and just collapse and be non-functional. It could be because he's going to be tempted by memories of the collective and want to give up. Or it could be he's going to be so irrationally hating on the collective he will make bad command decisions. And so there are a number of reasons you might not want to have a person who is a former drone in charge of your best ship. What would have been more interesting is, instead of sidelining them, because it's clear that's not going to stand, and would be to say, have Picard go to Riker in private and say, they've asked me to step aside for this. I'm to be your advisor, and you are to lead this.
Right. That would have been more likely, in fact, because the fact is you want every ship that possible, including your best ship, which the Enterprise is supposed to be, in the battle. And in fact, that's really what turns the tide, is having the Enterprise there. But also having Picard, because despite whatever liability he is, he also is an asset in that he knows the vulnerability that he's shooting at.
And the way I just sketched it out, it would have been a more dramatic character moment.
Right.
Yeah.
And it would have been uncomfortable for Riker and Picard. And then during the course of the battle, you get the ship shaken the wrong way. Riker gets a head injury, Picard's back in charge, and Riker recovers in a few minutes in sickbay. And you've got the entire rest of the movie back on track.
You wouldn't even need to do that, have them show up and battle's going badly and Riker just says, you take over.
Or just Picard say to Captain Riker, look, I know where you should hit it. Hit it here. I know this because I was a drone. It adds that dramatic moment, and then Riker has to, do I trust him or not? That could have been a real nice dramatic moment, and there. And
to be fair, you mentioned three things. Well, that third thing was that he makes irrational command decisions. And of course, what happens? He becomes Captain Ahab, who makes the irrational command decision to fight the Borg instead of just blowing up the ship until he gets called on it.
And there's some really nice stuff at the end, because they're playing out that theme of him being irrational. And then it turns out he's right.
Right.
I mean, he should have made the decision to evacuate and blow up the ship, and he did eventually. But then he's turned out as right. We can defeat the Borg without blowing up the ship, because he proceeds to do that with Data's help.
Right. Yeah, so we have Picard's famous line, "We draw the line here," and that whole thing.
It's no, not as good as Quark's.
And then Lily calls Picard on his 24th century arrogance, which we get a good helping of throughout this. Like this whole oh, we don't have money in the future. Oh, we don't have poverty and whatnot, and wars in the future, which is patently false, as we have seen time and time again in TNG and DS9 especially, where there is poverty and wars and whatnot in the future.
We don't have poverty and wars on Earth.
Right.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
Until there's the fear of the Dominion, and then there is war. At least a takeover.
But that's when Lily calls him Ahab, and he gets the reference, and he realizes his quest for vengeance will destroy him and the ship, except it doesn't, like you said.
Yeah, that scene is so nice, with Lily and Picard. I mean, that's one of the things that people remember most about this movie, and they remember her, you broke your little ship's line. And,
Yes.
And it's interesting. I mean, it comes very late in the movie. It's it's at the beginning of the final act, and it's very intense. And it's certainly the thing that Lily is most remembered for in the movie, where you get this visiting guest character who stands up to Picard and it tells him truths that other crew members have been trying to tell him, but they're hampered by their rank and their need to subordinate to him, and she's not. And she's able to be convincing, and she stands up to this heroic character and tells him off and succeeds in changing his mind. It is a really great scene.
I love it. It turns things on its head. Picard, the man from the future with all the answers and all the technology whiz bang, and she's supposed to be super impressed. And here we have, I think it was the third instance of Picard showing a primitive person their planet from space, a woman, primitive woman, her planet from space. And this is the one who, I mean, she's a little odd at being in space, but she's not awed by Picard. In fact, she sees him for who he is and puts him in his place in a sense.
Yeah. She also, and this, now that we have the Paramount Plus era of Star Trek, this is nothing new because now they cuss all the time on Star Trek.
Right.
But she uses cuss words in a Star Trek movie in a way that they have not been used before. We got a little bit of cussing in Search for Whales, but not much. And here we get Jean-Luc USOB, only she doesn't say SOB.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then she's very dramatic in what she tells him. She says, "Come on, Captain, you're not the first man to get a thrill out of murdering somebody. I see it all the time."
Right.
And then she says, "Captain Ahab has to go hunt his whale, and Jean-Luc blow up the damn ship."
Yep.
And it's very dramatic. I also, and then after he flies off the handle and smashes his display case, of course, we get the "you broke your little ship's" line. And I love the fact that he can quote Moby Dick.
Yes.
Yep.
And she says, "Actually, I never read it." After having said, because when she first makes the Captain Ahab reference, he says, "What?" And she says, "Moby Dick, don't you have books in the future?" And then later it's, "Actually, I never read it."
Well, it's such a cultural reference, so yeah.
Well, and that's the nice thing is it's a cultural reference, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the little touch in that scene is what does she pick up? The broken ship? The star drive of the Enterprise D.
Yes,
the ship that he broke in the last movie.
That's right. You did break your little ship last time. Yeah, and he has that great quote of, he piled upon the whale's white hump a sum of all the rage and hate felt by his own race. And it's like, if it just had been a cannon, he would have shot his heart upon it, which is a great line. I mean, it is a really great line. And yeah, there was that great interplay. Like she just didn't back down from him. Liar. And, it was a Picard we never saw in the series, that rage, that anger, that sort of thing. It felt a little sudden in this one. Like, why is Picard, like, as we started, before the Borg invasion, he's suffering this trauma. And so it felt, I remember when I first saw this 30 years ago, almost, feeling how sudden this was. And that was an odd experience. So jump back in. I want to kind of jump back to the beginning and talk a little bit about the cast and some of the...
Yeah, I was going to say we kind of jumped over the entire movie.
We did. Some of the cameos or small roles of actors who would later be well known. So we had Neil McDonough playing the Enterprise con officer Hawk.
Yeah, I didn't realize at first that was Neil McDonough. McDonough. I was looking at him going, boy, that looks like Neil McDonough. But
well, funny.
And I kept thinking of him as the guy that looks like Neil McDonough, and then it turns out, oh, that's who it is. Okay.
Yep.
But he's the red shirt in this, and it's obvious from the beginning that he's going to die, because he's this new guy we've never seen before. He's on the bridge, and they keep shoving his face into ours.
Yeah.
Right.
The way they're using the camera. So it's like, why do we keep focusing on this character we've never seen before? Obviously, he's going to become prominent and die.
Yep.
What about the other officer who they got sent back to, like, he was holding the checkpoint and, and got sent back basically to die or whatever. Was he from TNG? Was he one of the background guys in TNG?
Didn't
He
recognize
looked familiar.
him,
Okay.
I don't know. They brought a lot of the regular TNG people who had been on the series, like Nurse Igawa is
right.
in this and so forth. So if you had a name in TNG or otherwise worked in the background, you might end up in this.
Well,
right.
then Admiral Hayes was played by Jack Shearer, who was Darmok.
Darmok, really?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
He was actually several different roles.
But in the episode Darmok, Dathan is played by Paul Winfield.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. He was. Yeah, I don't see him in it. So it says he's Admiral Strickler in Voyager. He's
Maybe I misread it, but
okay. He's a Romulan and a Bullion in DS9.
Oh, I wonder where it came. I must have misread it. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's right. And he actually shows up as he presumably survives this battle, by the way, because he also shows up later on in Voyager in a couple episodes. So even though his ship is destroyed, he's survived, which good for him. The other actor I wanted to highlight, in addition, we have Robert Picardo, the doctor from Voyager.
His is great.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And I love how, Beverly Crusher has told him we're evacuating the Borg are about to break in, create a distraction so we can get away.
Yes.
And this is a brand new, never been used emergency medical hologram. He does not have all of the years of experience that the doctor does on Voyager.
Yeah.
And so when he's told, create a distraction, what he thinks to do is turn to the Borg and say, Federation medical research indicates that Borg implants can cause severe skin irritation. Would you perhaps care for an analgesic cream?
Yeah. Well, I love when he's told to basically block him. Is like, I'm a doctor, not a doorstop. So of course you had to have the call back to Bones.
Yep, the McCoy line. Yep, that was good too. And so the third one I wanted to call out was an even smaller part. The con officer on the Defiant, the helmsman, was Adam Scott from Parks and Rec. So, I saw it. I'm like, wait a minute. I didn't know that until I was watching. I'm like, I know him. That voice is familiar. And it's Adam Scott, who, everyone who's a fan of Parks and Rec would immediately recognize him as, and I was looking quickly and I forgot the name of the character, but he's on Parks and Rec as Leslie Knope's eventual husband, boyfriend, whatever. So just a lot of fun there. So that's the cast. And this, Alice Krige as the Borg Queen, her first appearance as the Borg Queen. Very interesting. She does also shows up as the Borg Queen in Voyager later. Should note, by the way, because I don't think we have yet. Annie Wershing is the actress who played the Borg Queen in the second season of Picard. She recently passed away, so I just wanted to. Yeah, she had cancer, and so she recently passed away. Good.
Yeah, she actually had cancer as she was playing the Borg Queen. She found out before she got the role and continued to work through the cancer, which is impressive when you think of the makeup and everything that she would have to go through to take on that role.
Yeah, I really enjoyed her, and she was in The Rookie and Bosch, first season of Bosch, and so she was a very good actress you've seen in various things. So may she rest in peace, and God bless her family. But so Alice Krige, though, really kind of set the bar for what we have. And this is the first time we have a Borg Queen and a Borg personified. And that was a big change.
We had Locutus before. And in the writing of The Best of Both Worlds, the writers discussed what's it going to be like if we have, if we keep the Borg the way they were originally presented as just this mob with a hive mind, if we don't have a face for the characters to interact with. And they said at the time, we need to introduce a queen. And during the process of writing The Best of Both Worlds, the idea occurred to them, oh, Picard is the queen. And that's how we got the Locutus character. And then, even though it doesn't really make any sense, because you've created a Locutus character. So look, and I'm sorry, in Latin, Locutus means that which has been said.
Right.
But in any event, you create this Locutus figure in your collective to assist in the assimilation of humanity. Well, as soon as you've assimilated any humans, you should know that's never going to work.
Right.
That is not how human psychology works. Having someone who's a member of our species to talk to us is not going to get us to cooperate.
It's going to make it worse.
Yeah, it's going to make it worse. So the thing to do, if you're going to use brute force to overpower us, is just get on with the brute force, because the talking isn't going to help.
Right.
But they then, in this movie, they apparently there was a draft of it where they didn't have the queen. And one of the suits said it feels kind of faceless, and then they came up with the queen role all over again.
Yeah, I mean the promise of the Borg is it's a faceless enemy, like a force of nature, and that was interesting in TNG, like this idea of this force of nature we're facing. But you're right, it presents that problem where we need a face of an enemy to, especially in a movie, and I could see that being the tension.
I can see it. I also think it's kind of lazy writing that in Smolens the Borg to have a queen, because they try to, in this movie, they try to play it both ways of she is the collective somehow. She's not really controlling the collective. She just is it. She says, you imply duality. When she's asked the question, do you control the collective? She says, you imply a duality where none exists. So it's like she's a readout of the collective in the same way any other Borg could be in principle. But later, no, she's just the dictator of the collective.
Yeah.
See, they basically phrase it that she's the collective incarnate, where the entire collective in one physical being, but she doesn't run the collective. She is this incarnate action of the collective, if you will.
Would it be kind of analogous to, and this is only analogy, like the human body, where my mind is part of me, but it's not separate from me. I am my mind, and my mind is me, and my body is me. And so does my mind control my body? Sort of, but also not, because I am my body and my mind? I don't know. It seems a stretch.
You're giving them too much credit. They're not thinking about it deeply.
Okay.
And they really wanted a villain who's also a critical failure point. So when you kill the queen, all the other Borg blow up and die.
That's true. Okay. So we Picard destroys the cube, knows exactly when to hit it. They get caught in the Borg's time wake and get sucked in, which is a convenient plot device to enable them to see that the time is changing without being affected by it. And so thus follow it through. And they end up having to go to Father Cory's neck of the woods, Bozeman, Montana, which they're also, by the way, I don't know if you heard that the USS Bozeman was in the battle. So they had they threw that in there. I don't know if we're still being captained by Kelsey Grammer or not, but
I think in spin-off media they do say he was, like in some of the books and things like that. He was still there.
Okay.
Actually, no, I take that back. If I remember right, in books, he was he was in charge of the building of the Enterprise E.
Oh, okay.
So he might not have been, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, you want a guy who's 20 years out of date to oversee the building of your most advanced ship?
Certainly did a good job.
Apparently he did okay. So the date is April 4th, 2063, the day before first contact, and as we mentioned, 10 years after the Third World War. Most of the major cities in the world are destroyed, and 600 million people are dead, which to me, if most of the major cities of the world are destroyed, that's a lot more than 600 million people, frankly. I always had a problem with this idea that they would have of all the major cities in the world being destroyed in this war. That would do more than just be bad or just slightly interrupt civilization. That's a civilization-ending event. That would.
Well, I think that was supposed to be the point, though. Is that this was such a severe battle that it really did kind of reboot human civilization. World War III almost rebooted human civilization, but allowed it to get to the point where then we could have the first contact and go from there.
For me, it's like that's a 90% die-off event, that sort of thing. But I mean, I don't want to push it too hard, but it's hard for me to take.
Incidentally, so the point we're at where this starts happening, where they eject the sphere and the battle with the Borg is over, and now we're shifting to the sphere, changing history plot. That's 10 minutes into the movie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it feels, in my notes I have that it feels very brisk. We don't have lots of pillar filler here. Pillar filler was material that Michael Piller wrote to pad character moments and pad out the runtime. There's no pillar filler here. This is all very straight ahead. We're in motion. It's proceeding at a very fast clip. In fact, the beginning clip, the first 10 minutes of the movie feel rushed because we go from Picard having a dream to the Enterprise being sidelined, to the battle going badly, to the Enterprise breaking orders, to the Enterprise defeating the cube, to the cube ejecting the sphere. I mean, all of that is in 10 minutes.
Right.
And it feels very fast and very rushed, and they're not really playing out the emotional beats of all that. In a way, because they're so focused on getting us to the time travel plot, the Borg invasion of the Federation that we've been waiting for 6 years, we're told at the beginning of the film, it feels rushed. It feels, underwhelming because we go through it so quickly.
And typical movie distance compression where they get from the neutral zone to Earth in like 2 minutes. Like the battle is barely continuing and they're there.
Yeah, I was watching that, and I guess we're meant to infer there are hours and hours of travel time there, and the battle's still going on, but they do nothing to convey that. It feels like blink and they're in the Earth solar system.
Right.
And there's a line when they first hear about the Borg cube getting there that it's going to take, Data says something, 3 hours and minutes to get there.
Yeah.
And of course, Picard then has to say, but we've been told to go the other way.
Right. Yeah. It's one of the movie things that they do. And right to me, it kind of strips it of the momentousness of this occasion, which is that long-awaited Borg invasion. It feels pretty quick. So they get to the 21st century, and
also
Picard,
the Borg invasion plan is stupid.
Send one cube.
One cube into. We're later told there are 150 worlds in the Federation, and you send one cube
to Earth, to the center of the Federation.
Earth?
Right. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And as we know, there are thousands of cubes. But okay. So they get to the 21st century. Picard, Data, was it Beverly? Beverly beams down. Deanna, and they make sure to put on 21st century clothes. But Data, like they're not worried that people are gonna see Data and go,
"I know.
What are you?"
Yeah, I wondered about Data. I wondered about that. They don't make anything out of it, but I wondered about it.
He's got a rare skin condition. That's all you'd have to say.
Yeah, he's albino. He has that skin condition. So they get to this missile site in Montana, which in reality is a real U.S. Air Force silo that's now a museum, the Titan II Museum outside of Tucson, I think, or it's in Arizona, where they filmed it. They got permission to film using a real decommissioned Titan II missile that they then put a capsule on top of for the spaceship.
See, I thought the surroundings didn't look like a typical Los Angeles type forest. Those are much more. Jimmy, of course, knows better what they would look like, but that looked more like a Mountain West.
No,
forest.
that is.
Yeah. It's then out in the Mojave, you'll see areas that look like that.
Okay, because that did look more like a Montana type scene than you usually see from something filmed in the Los Angeles area.
Right. The interiors are definitely of the missile silo were in Arizona, but the rest of it was filmed in California. So they get there, they find all these people dead, and then Lily is like shooting at them with a projectile weapon, and Data's like, "I'll handle this," and hops down. Mm-hmm. She shoots him up, and then he says, "Greetings." It's just a very classically Data thing. I thought that was pretty funny. And this all occurs after the Borg have been shooting at the planet, trying to kill Cochrane
at the missile site.
Missile site, yep. And the Enterprise has destroyed the Borg sphere, and they think that all the Borg are dead. They don't know that they beamed over the last minute because their sensors were down conveniently. Mm-hmm. So, and then we have this scene of Picard wanting to touch the Phoenix, and this whole like, Data, why do you want to touch it? What is? And it's like, Data wouldn't know that touch is important to humans. Like,
he's got his emotion chip, and it's turned on at the moment.
Yeah,
right. And it just feels like they keep doing these things with Data, where Data would at least have the information about human nostalgia, human sentiment. He would at least have, after all this time. But what they're doing is foreshadowing the touch related to Data's skin that he gets later, which is a whole nother issue. So we have these images of or these scenes of the Enterprise slowly getting taken over, and it's nice that they do that movie thing where that we don't see the monster, we don't see the shark under the water for a while, and we get point of view from the Borg, but we see their effects, but we don't see them. So they're doing that.
Also, the Borg at this point have nanobots that can transform you into a Borg instantly, basically.
Right.
And I mean, they'll make some modifications to your body impossibly, but they don't turn you into the full Borg with all the accoutrements. They still have to do that to you as a second stage. But in terms of, you're neutralized and you're on our side now. Mm-hmm. And that happens instantly. And okay, fine. The idea of nanotechnology is good, I guess, in that it is realistic that we would have nanotechnology in the future, and certainly an advanced group like the Borg would. But the problem is, it's too powerful. They have ridiculous restrictions on how it works. The Borg have these tubes that they stick out of the back of their hands to inject you in the neck with the nanobots. And it's like, no, that is not how this is not how any sane strategist would devise a nanobot attack. It needs to be cloud-based. You spray these into an environment and let them do their job. You don't put them in tubes and inject them into people's necks.
Right.
You just create a nanobot vapor that you let people inhale, or that gets on their skin and takes them over that way.
Right. It is and that's the thing is, if you did that, the Borg would be too powerful, and so they've kind of pulled it back. But there's that obvious flaw in it that they want us to wave a hand at and overlook. So Picard once they know that the Borg are invading, and Picard beams up, sends Riker down to deal with the Cochrane situation. And Picard tells the security teams that he's leading to take back the ship not to hesitate to fire on Enterprise crew members who've been assimilated because they're lost. And I'm thinking, weren't you recovered from being a full-on drone, dude? Like, why are they lost?
Yeah, but in this situation, in the Picard situation, they had a way to get him back. Mm-hmm. And in this situation, it's so rapidly moving that there is, and they're likely dealing with multiple crew members who have been assimilated. There's no time in this situation to stop and try to rescue people.
Right.
Agreed.
And his line is, you'll be doing them a favor. Now, part of what this is the ramp up of irrationality. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But they could have, if they wanted to. I understand that the strategic decision or the tactical decision not to try to rescue people, because of the resource limitations we have right now. but they could have made that explicit, and say, we don't have the liberty right now to try to rescue people, so do not try to rescue people.
It's a very difficult moral decision he's made here too, which Lily will call out, because in that scene, which we'll talk about in some detail in a bit, in the holodeck where he shoots up the Borg there, she notices this is one of his crew members, and he's rooting around in his guts for the Borg, component, and he's completely phlegmatic about it at this point. He was raged a second ago, and now he's phlegmatic about it. And she's like, "This is one of your crew members. Like, you have no feelings about this." And so she kind of calls him a little bit on the morality of what he's doing. So they're not blind to it, and I think that's part of it.
They are, though, kind of blind to what actually happened in Picard's experience with the Borg. They retcon it twice in this movie, because when we saw Best of Both Worlds, we saw, even though he's been assimilated and they're sticking Borg stuff on him, Picard is crying.
Yeah.
So he's clearly still in there. And then at the end of it, when they've rescued him, they ask, how much do you remember? And he says everything, including some brilliant strategy. And here at the beginning of the film, they're telling us every trace of individuality was destroyed. I was one of them, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you weren't. They may have been in control of you, but you weren't. And then at the end of the movie, they retcon it again and say, oh, there was this whole Queen thing there, and you didn't want me to be a drone. You wanted me to be your consort, your equal. And like, really? How and why?
Right. Yeah, they do. They're inconsistent with the treating that. I mean, I get why Picard would have been more conscious. They wanted him as Locutus to be more individual than the drones are. The drones are merely drones and erase all personality. Although what we learned from later on in Voyager is that the individual survives inside. There is some of them in there. So yeah, there is also another inconsistency, which is as the security teams are making their way through the Borg infested corridors. Try not. Don't shoot at them. Don't interrupt them. If we aren't a threat, they'll ignore us. And like 2 minutes ago, they were assimilating crewmen unprovoked.
Yeah.
Like,
why? Yeah. I know this is irrational and inconsistent, and it plays to their disadvantage later in the movie. I have in my notes, Borg need to seriously rethink the strategic ignoring policy.
Yeah.
Because it always hurts them.
Right.
Well, and I mean, that goes all the way back to when we first see the Borg. They realize very quickly that they're not going to do anything. They'll ignore them until they pull out their weapons.
Right. Yeah. They do this a lot in Voyager too. Like this where they go on these cubes and wander around.
Which you would think that the collective would go, hey, this is Voyager. They are our enemy. Do not ignore them.
The Doctor is present. Assimilate.
Yeah.
Which is a little Doctor Who reference.
By the way, there's a line I really like where Lily has split. She's up on the ship now. And during the evacuation of sickbay, she left Dr. Crusher and the others and went off on her own. And she's got a phaser, and she's waving it around at Picard and telling him, if you don't start giving me explanations, I'm going to start pushing buttons and things like that. And finally, after he wins enough of her confidence that she hands over the phaser, he looks at it and says, maximum setting, you would have vaporized me if you shot. And she looks at him and just in an understated way says, it's my first ray gun. Yeah.
There's another moment where she kind of refers to the Borg as bionic zombies.
Yeah.
and he says they're the Borg. She says Borg sounds Swedish.
Yeah.
Referencing the famous Swedish tennis player Bjorn Borg. So,
I was thinking the Swedish chef. Borg.
Yeah.
Borg is a Swedish morpheme. It shows up a lot.
Yes, it does. So down on the planet, they found Cochrane drunk in the bar with Deanna has found him, and so she's been drinking with him, trying to convince him to finish the warp ship. And Picard finds her drunk, and he says, and she's like,
Riker finds her drunk.
Riker, thank you.
Yep.
And she says, I'm trying to blend in, and he's laughing at her, goes, "You're blended, all right." Which
yeah. Don't you criticize my psychological processes or counseling process? Yeah. And then collapses on the table.
Right. So we have this Cochrane building a warp ship, the most advanced vessel ever created by a human being, like a shade tree mechanic in the wilds of Montana. And that's always kind of bothered me a little bit.
Well, except it's not quite that, because they at the beginning, I mean, it's easy to get that impression, because the only people that are ongoing parts of the story from Montana are Cochrane and Lily. Mm-hmm. And that can make it seem like it's just the two of them. But actually, at the missile complex, there are all these other people who are working on the project. And when they show up, Dr. Crusher looks around and says they're all dead. So apparently there were a lot more people working on this, and Cochrane and Lily happened to survive because they weren't in the missile facility when it was attacked.
Okay. I guess I can see that.
Yeah, there was large. You saw a large crowd of people in the bar there, and before the attack. So.
But they are kind of out in the wilds, like just sort of in the middle of nowhere.
Zephyr Cochrane was a prepper. He had all the material he needed, apparently.
I guess.
Well, I think after World War III, it was the preppers who survived.
Yeah.
Now, given that Montana has Maelstrom Air Force Base, which is one of the largest ICBM fields in the world, all the silos.
25 miles from where I'm sitting right now. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and this is a ICBM silo that they use, an ICBM that they're using. Mm-hmm. It does push belief a little bit that that would have survived World War III. But
yeah, and that's if you remember the movie War Games, Matthew Broderick.
Yep.
You do would you like to play a game?
Right.
There was one scene where they showed, if I remember, I know they showed Grand Forks, which is a missile silo center.
Yeah.
And I believe they did show Malmstrom going poof, because we know that the first targets are our center of government, meaning DC, and the missile silos.
Right. So we can't strike back. So yeah.
So that's kind of morbid joke, but where I am living now, I say, yeah, if World War III happens, I'll have enough time of it to go, oh my God, I'm heartily sorry for having offended thee. And that'd be about it.
That'd be about it, right. So, moving back to the more fun of the movie, the people on the surface don't know what's going on up on the Enterprise. They've been cut off, and that's an important aspect of this. So we have these two poles of the story, the two different stories running simultaneously, and they're trying to convince Cochrane that he needs to do this thing.
Yeah, and the two poles of the story have markedly different tones. The one down on Earth is much lighter and much more and is capable of comedy,
right?
In to a much greater extent, whereas the one on the Enterprise is suspense and horror and action. And I like the way they cut between the two, and they use the two plots to play off of each other to keep the audience in the kind of emotional sweet spot of this is not too much of a lark and it's not too much horror. We have a nice balance by shifting between these.
I do like that we get that balance between them, because it would have been too much if it was just all Borg. So they're trying to convince Cochrane. They repeat the line that in the future there's no war, disease, or poverty, and that whole thing. And because now they've had to come right out and tell him, look, we're from the future. You need to fly and make first contact. And he says, we have the famous line where he says, and you people, you're all astronauts on some kind of Star Trek, which the only time Star Trek is ever said in the Star Trek series. Meanwhile, back on the Enterprise, the Borg Queen grafts human skin onto Data. To what end?
Well, to give him a human sense of feeling. Right. Because apparently he can understand human emotions now. And somehow that will be enhanced by giving him sensual feelings as well.
I guess. I mean, presumably he has a sense of touch. He can sense heat and cold and all that sort of stuff around him.
Yeah. Sensors in his hands and things like that. Yeah.
But he doesn't have the full range of human senses.
Yeah.
In a way, it's the opposite of the Borg. The Borg take biological and graft on the mechanical. This is taking the mechanical and grafting on the biological.
Right. And I guess
it's a way it's making him a Borg, but just the opposite way.
Okay. Right. Okay. I see that. Because what they need is to get the encryption algorithm password out of Data because he's locked them out of the ship, so they can't keep doing what they need to do. Okay.
Well, also, I like the body horror of this. And they they graft large sections of skin onto Data's arms and also on his face. Half of his face becomes skin. And you know how Borg skin is that pale color?
Yes.
This isn't.
Right.
So they are taking that skin off dead Enterprise officers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And grafting it onto Data, and because it's pink. And when you think about that, it's like, okay, this is some effective body horror. They are grafting dead Enterprise crewmen's skin onto Data.
Yeah, well, then they also changed one of his eyes, which of course means just Brent Spiner wearing one contact instead of two. But the eye where they've covered his face with the skin, they also put in an eyeball.
Dead crewman's
eyeball. Yeah.
Well, it would have been funny if someone said, I don't recognize him. His face rings a bell. But
And incidentally, notice what they do, because when they turn someone into a Borg, they typically take the left half of their face and replace the eye.
Mm-hmm.
And as they're turning Data into a Borg, they take the left half of his face and they replace the eye.
Yep.
Right. Yes. So we get that. It's that mirror. He's a mirror image Borg thing. Right. So later on, Data pretends to be, or is he pretending to be hurt and confused with the Queen when she's talking of him being tempted by the flesh? Is Data just pretending, or has he really?
No, I think he's serious. You think he's not initially being seduced. He is at first. I mean, like, she's telling him, tear the flesh off your arm like you would a defective circuit, and he can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, that's consistent with us not being able to cut off our arm, or things like that. There is a visceral feeling that we have as embodied beings where it would be very hard for us to do something like detach an arm. And as he's getting flesh, it's at least movie logic believable that's happening to him too. Mm-hmm. He does at a certain point though start voluntarily making out with the Queen.
Mm-hmm.
Where she kisses him and then steps back, and he steps forward in order to kiss her again. And so he is voluntarily making out with the Queen once the sensual seduction stuff starts. And of course, we were reminded all the way back from episode 2, Fully Functional.
And how long ago that was to the second.
Of course. Yeah.
Now, he says later that he only was tempted by her offer for 0.68 seconds. We're not told when that happened, but presumably everything is either before she makes that offer or it's after he's rejected the offer and is now just pretending.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's what I was wondering is at some point it switches to just pretending to accept it and to get her confidence, to get in her confidence. I forgot to mention we were going to talk about the holodeck. We get to see the big goodbye holodeck program again. The Maitre D is played by Ethan Phillips.
Yep.
Neelix from Voyager, who asked not to be credited so as to confuse fans. I'm not sure why.
He's much less. He's very non-Neelix like here and much less annoying.
Yes.
Yeah. Though we do get to see Neelix go flying when the Borg throws him.
Yes,
so.
we get to see that.
Oh, by the way, another plot hole. So Picard creates the whole big goodbye sequence on the holodeck for why? Because it's like he looks like he's temporarily camouflaging himself from the Borg with the crowd. And his goal is to get close to Nicky the Nose's henchman so he can steal a machine gun that Nicky the Nose's henchman has in Chapter 13. And I'm going, dude, you're on a holodeck. Just say, give me a submachine gun and turn the safeties off, and you can spare all this other time.
Or Replicator, create a 50 caliber minigun, so Arnold Schwarzenegger style, that's real, that I can carry through the ship and throw slugs at the Borg. Right. Presumably that's why I did it, but yeah.
Because you wanted the 1920s ballroom with the Tommy gun, and
we had to have the big goodbye. That was the very iconic part of TNG lore. So the Borg shift strategy, now the idea is they want to call in the Borg of the time period of the 21st century, and they're going to use an antenna set up on the deflector dish. I like that when Picard turns to Worf and says, how's your zero-G skills? And Worf visibly deflates when Picard says, we're going on an EVA. It's like, he kind of like,
he says, how well do you remember your zero-G combat training? And Worf says, I remember it turning my stomach. And I love that this is Worf is not gung-ho about EVA zero-G combat.
Yes.
He's Mr. Warrior, Mr. Weapons expert, and to have him say, I'm not looking forward to that. It turns my stomach, is a really great character moment for him.
Yeah. Well, then he responds to Picard, what are you thinking? Kind of like he knows what's going to come next, but what are you thinking?
Right. Here we have Lieutenant Hawk's demise. He gets assimilated, which is kind of, we have he's in profile, then turns, and we see half his face has got the Borg stuff on it. There's a little bit of effective dramatic moment. I like,
I also, there's some 2001 A Space Odyssey references here. In 2001, it's the AE-35 antenna that fails, and that's what they're having to repair here.
Oh, very nice. That's a good reference. Cool. I didn't know that one. That's good. So we have the moment when Picard has decided to finally destroy the Enterprise, sets auto-destruct, and we have this parallelism between the auto-destruct sequence on the Enterprise and the pre-launch checklist on the Phoenix, which is the Cochrane's warp ship, so that we kind of have these moment of triumph and apparent defeat. They're going to send the crew to Gravit Island, which is a remote island in the South Pacific, so they can stay out of the way of history. Not a real place. There was no Gravit Island. That was Ronald D. Moore's assistant, apparently, that they named it after. And then they were going to leave a message for Riker and the others to just stay out of the way of history, which was a recurring theme that we have. We saw it in Picard Season 2, by the way, with Cristobal Rios.
Yeah, so we also have Zefram Cochrane explain what really motivates him to Riker and Geordi. He says, you know what my vision is? $, money. And he wants to retire to a Caribbean island with scantily clad women. And so that is a nice revelation at this point in the movie. Also, we have, playing off the larger theme of the movie, of how Picard's initial experience as a drone has impacted him, in the lead up to the Lily scene, where she convinces Picard to blow up the ship, we have a scene prior to that on the bridge where Worf and Dr. Crusher are both standing up to Picard and telling him this. Mm-hmm. And Worf at one point says, with all due respect, sir, I believe you are allowing your personal experience with the Borg to influence your judgment. Mm-hmm. And they just lays it right on the table. That's the central theme that we've been developing since Picard's dream. And both Worf and Dr. Crusher are pushing him on this, and he keeps knocking him down verbally. Mm-hmm. At one point, he tells Worf that he's a coward for not wanting to to fight the Borg. And Worf says, "If you were any other man, I would kill you where you stand."
Right.
And, which is really nice. But eventually, he cuts off the debate, and Worf and Crusher fall in line. Mm-hmm. And it's at that moment that Lily goes to Crusher and says, "But he's wrong on this." And she says, "The captain's made his decision. We have to follow orders." Right. And that's when, and she holds up her hand to Dr. Crusher as if to say, "Wait a minute." And then she follows him into this side room and talks to him and gives him the blow up the damn ship Jean-Luc speech.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I like the way that starts too, is where she calls him on the fact that he gave this order that seems irrational. And he's like, "Well, they follow my orders." And she goes, they're probably used to your orders being rational, reasonable. Right. And that's how it all starts. But it's just a good way of pointing out very clearly. It's like, this was not a good order. And he's not acting as the normal Jean-Luc Picard. He's not being rational about this. And so they really did a good job of leading into that whole argument. And then him coming back out and, "Okay, we're going to do this. And I owe you," I like that too, is, "I owe you apology for some of the things I said." Some.
Yeah. Which things?
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, there's a little bit of hand-waving here where, as they're evacuating the ship, and Picard has had, because he's got some, we've been hearing it throughout the movie. They never talk about it, but Picard has some kind, even though he presumably doesn't have Borg implants in him anymore, Picard has some kind of machine telepathy link with the Borg collective. He's capable of sensing things. And now that Data is part of the collective, he hears Data calling to him telepathically. And so he turns to Lily and says, "Here's some instructions. If you see Riker or Worf or any member of my crew, tell them to go to North America, find an obscure location, and try to stay out of the way of history." And he hands her this little pad. And I'm going, your crew is getting on the ships the escape pods right behind her. Walk 10 feet and give it to them yourself.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, they're going to Gravit Island. Presumably he's sending Lily back to Montana, I guess.
No, she went back with them. She went back with them.
With the
crew. She went down to the island as well.
Yeah,
I guess.
But even if she wasn't, there are crew members. If you want your crew to have this message, give it to them.
Right, exactly.
He did, just through Lily.
Yep. So we have this scene on board the Phoenix where they're having the countdown, and Cochrane's like, "Oh no, I've forgotten something very important." And like, what? Abort the countdown. And he's like, "Oh, I got it."
No, well, Riker says we should abort the countdown, and Cochrane is like, "No, it's probably not that important." Oh, wait a minute, here it is, and it's Magic Carpet Ride. He wants to take off playing Magic Carpet Ride, which is a very nice scene.
Yes, that was very good. I like that. So the Picard stays behind to rescue Data. The Queen wants Picard to give himself willingly to her when he gets down there. And we have
why?
Yeah.
Why? Why do you want it to be willing? You take people over by compulsion. Just compel him.
Right. I mean, is there an ego thing with the Borg Queen going on?
None of this makes any sense.
Right. And Data has his temptation in the desert moment, or temptation in the garden, maybe forbidden fruit.
I don't know. My sense is that's long over.
Yeah.
He's just all acting at this point.
Okay. Right. And so the big MacGuffin is if we break the coolant tanks, it will release all this caustic material that will destroy anything organic, which is all of Data's organic parts are conveniently removed at that point, as well as all of the drones. And the Borg Queen, was there organic left with her, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, she's got her head in her chest and everything, and all that just gets destroyed. We see her skull and her spine afterwards, which is still active somehow, and Picard neck snaps or spine snaps her metal spine, which causes it to deactivate. So I don't know exactly what's happening there, but certainly he's symbolically killing her. Data literally head snapped a Borg earlier in combat.
Yep.
So he just grabs a Borg head and twists it so far the neck pops, and so Data directly killed someone that way.
That's true.
Adapt to this.
yeah, exactly.
So we have, the Cochrane gets his warp speed moment. We have the Vulcans see it, and it's interesting. With Cochrane, is what we have is we're seeing the future is born out of a flawed human being. We've talked about that before. And he has this encounter with the Vulcans where he's dancing trying to get them to dance and drink with him. And it's funny because as Star Trek fans, we know how those Vulcans must have thought of this display of emotion and things, especially as we see in Enterprise later.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny.
If you watch carefully, the Vulcans he's got in the bar, though, there are several, but there's a man that's sitting at a table that he's trying to get to drink, and there's a woman sitting at the table. And the man, when he tries to get him to get up and dance, they're not interested in that, but the man immediately turns back to his drink. And so they're like trying, as Vulcans, they're trying to engage with this primitive culture and their primitive rituals. So that was positive.
There's apparently an apocryphal idea that that Vulcan captain was Spock's grandfather.
Yes. Yeah. Sarek's father or grandfather. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Sarek is a couple hundred years old. Yeah.
And they have a name for him that they establish in Enterprise.
Oh, right. Okay. That's where we get that from. Okay. So, one last note on this: it's the only Star Trek film without the transporter room. We never see we see transporters in use, but we never see the transporter room, which is kind of interesting because that actually could have been a useful tool at various points throughout the story that if they had transporters, but we never see the transporter room.
I would assume the Borg assimilated those. So
right, probably. So, so that's where we end. Father Cory, last thoughts on this?
Well, this, in my opinion, is the best of the TNG movies. And I would put it in all the Star Trek movies, one of the top three. Now, I'd have to go through and kind of figure out what the other two in the top three are. But I definitely, this is one of the better of the Star Trek movies as a whole. And like I said, in my opinion, the best of the TNG movies, absolutely. So I was glad we're looking forward to talking about this because I've always liked this one. And not just because part of it's set in Montana. Of course, this is where we get the scene where Geordi is talking about the statue, and you're looking to the heavens, and of course, lower deck we get to see the historical monument is actually a theme park, and the statue is in the middle of the theme park.
Right.
So that was a lot of fun.
Yep.
But yeah, like I said, I enjoyed this one. This is if I was reading the wiki correctly, at least of the TOS TNG movies, this is the best grossing movie of those. Most successful of those movies.
Right. And Jimmy, final thoughts?
I liked seeing the escape pods for the Enterprise, and I like seeing them used. It makes sense that they would have them, and we hear about escape pods in other Star Trek things, but this is the first time we actually saw them for the Enterprise. And I'm glad they did not destroy the ship. Because they just destroyed it last time. And they even hang a lantern on that when the order comes to blow this version of the Enterprise up. Someone says, Crusher has one of these lines, but someone says, well, that's it for the Enterprise E. And someone else says, oh, we hardly knew her. And so it's nice that they don't actually destroy her. I agree this is the best of the Next Generation era movies. I think some of the original series movies are better. I would put Search for Whales probably above this, and maybe Berlin Wall in Space. This might be on a par or better than Wrath of Khan, in my mind. But those are definitely, to my mind, the top four. Is Khan, Whales, Berlin Wall, and First Contact.
I think I'd agree with that four. I might reverse Whales and Khan, but
yeah. I agree. I think this is the best of the TNG films, and Wrath of Khan and Voyage Home would be like the top 2. This might be 3. Undiscovered Country 4, something like that. But I think we're in agreement, I guess, if I'm hearing correctly, that those would be our top 4 in some order.
Which means we agree with the even numbers movies were good and the odd number movies weren't. Although we've at least I've kind of warmed on number 3. So
I mean, 3 has things to recommend it, but yes.
The strict form of the rule is even movies are good, odd movies are not as good.
Yes, I see that. And
then there's 5, which is just bad.
Right. Well, and I think the rule gets broken by Nemesis, frankly, but we'll get to that eventually. All right, I think that should do it for this time. We want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including Philip G, Danny L, Joshua G, Sean E, and Connie Z. Their generous tax-deductible donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. And so that's it from us. We would love to know what you think of Star Trek First Contact. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, send an email to trek@sqpn.com, or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can watch us on the Secrets of Star Trek in video on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where you should hit the bell, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing Star Trek The Next Generation, Haven. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Star Trek.
Well, thank you, Dom.
And Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thank you, and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, assimilate this!